a 7-figure penthouse overlooking Central Park, a 9-month baby bump concealed beneath couture silk, and a husband with the audacity of a king demanding the impossible. He told her his very pregnant wife to act classy for the woman he was sleeping with. He expected tears, a quiet retreat, maybe a dignified pout. He thought he knew his wife, the quiet, elegant woman who curated his perfect life. He was wrong. What she did next wasn't just classy. It was a masterclass in demolition. She didn't just end a marriage. She dismantled an empire with a single piece of paper. The crystal glasses on the dining table were worth more than the first car Charlotte Dubois had ever owned. Each one was a whisper-thin testament to her husband's wealth, hand-cut in a pattern so intricate it seemed to trap the dying afternoon light and hold it hostage. Everything in their Manhattan penthouse was like that, beautiful, expensive, and cold to the touch, just like her husband Harrison Montgomery. For 5 years, Charlotte had played her part to perfection. She was Mrs. Montgomery, the graceful, intelligent wife who spoke 3 languages, understood the nuances of modern art, and could host a charity gala for 200 of the city's elite without breaking a sweat. She was the perfect accessory to Harrison's burgeoning private equity empire. He had molded her, polished her, and placed her on a pedestal in their gilded cage 48 floors above the city. In the beginning, she had mistaken his meticulous control for affection. His critiques of her wardrobe, where he claimed to ensure she was always seen as his equal. His management of their social calendar was to protect her from stress. His insistence on handling all their finances was so she could focus on the beautiful things in life. But over time, the velvet glove had worn thin, revealing the iron fist beneath. He wasn't protecting her. He was curating her just like the art on their walls. Now, at 8.5 months pregnant with their first child, a son, the gilded bars of her cage felt more constricting than ever. The pregnancy had been Harrison's idea, of course. It was the next logical acquisition in building the Montgomery dynasty. He'd announced it at a dinner party before they'd even seriously discussed it, leaving Charlotte to smile graciously and accept congratulations for a decision that had been made for her. The loneliness was a physical ache, a constant companion in the sprawling, silent apartment. Harrison was rarely home, his days consumed by multi-million-dollar deals and his nights by... Well, Charlotte had stopped asking. His excuses had become flimsy, his absences longer. His scent of a strange, cloyingly sweet perfume more frequent. She wasn't a fool. She was just tired. Tonight was supposed to be their 6th wedding anniversary. Charlotte had hoped for a quiet evening, perhaps a simple dinner at the small Italian restaurant where he had proposed. A chance to reconnect before the baby arrived, to find a sliver of the man she thought she had married. Harrison had strolled in an hour ago, his tailored suit, immaculate, not a single silver-brown hair out of place. He kissed her cheek, a dry, dismissive peck that smelled of expensive cologne and the city's indifference. Change of plans for tonight? "My dear," he'd said, loosening his tie as he surveyed the table she had meticulously set for 2. "We'll be dining in. I'm having a guest join us." Charlotte's hand went to the swell of her belly. "A guest, Harrison. It's our anniversary. Business, Charlotte." "It's important," he said, his tone final. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to her. "It's Victoria Sterling, from the Sterling-Finch Consortium. This deal could be the biggest of my career." Victoria Sterling. The name landed like a stone in the pit of her stomach. Charlotte had seen her picture in financial magazines. Sharp blonde, dressed in power suits that were practically armor. Rumors had been swirling about them for months, whispers at charity events, and knowing glances from other wives that made Charlotte's skin crawl. Harrison had always dismissed them as the jealous ramblings of less successful men. "You're bringing a business associate to our home for our anniversary dinner." Charlotte's voice was quiet, but a tremor of rebellion ran through it. He finally turned to face her, his expression one of mild irritation, as if swatting away a fly. "It's a power move, Charlotte. Bringing her into our home shows strength, stability. It shows her I have a perfect life, a perfect wife. It's the final push I need to close this merger." He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her swollen form. The dress she wore, a deep sapphire silk, had cost a fortune, but in his eyes she was suddenly lacking. "I need you to be on your best behavior." He continued his voice, lowering into a conspiratorial, condescending tone. "Be charming. Be elegant. Pour the wine, smile, and don't talk about the baby unless she asks. And for God's sake—" He paused, stepping closer to her, his gaze hardening. "Whatever you might be thinking, whatever little dramas you've concocted in your head, you will keep them to yourself. I need you to act classy, understand no scenes. Just be the perfect hostess. Act classy." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Act classy for the woman who was likely sleeping with her husband. Act classy while her heart was breaking. Act classy as he brought his infidelity to her very dinner table on the one night that was supposed to be theirs. A strange calm washed over Charlotte. It wasn't surrender. It was the chilling clarity that comes when all illusions are finally shattered. For months, she had been clinging to the wreckage of their marriage, hoping to salvage something. Now she saw it for what it was, a sunken ship he was dancing on. "Of course, Harrison," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "The perfect hostess. I understand completely." He smiled, satisfied. "Good girl. Now I'd go and freshen up. Victoria will be here in an hour." As he walked towards their bedroom suite to shower, Charlotte remained motionless in the center of the vast living room. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the marble floor. Her reflection in the dark windows showed a woman she barely recognized, a lonely, pregnant figure in a palace of lies. He wanted her to act classy. He wanted the perfect hostess. Oh, she would give him a performance he would never forget. She walked calmly to her study, a small, soundproofed room that was her only true sanctuary in the apartment. She closed the heavy oak door, the click of the lock echoing the final closing of a door in her heart. She opened the bottom drawer of her antique desk, pushing aside stacks of art auction catalogues. Beneath them was a large, sealed manila envelope. Her hands were perfectly steady as she drew it out. Inside wasn't a secret stash of money or a vengeful letter. It was something far more powerful. Something she had prayed she would never have to use, a nuclear option she and her lawyer, Mr. Alistair Finch, had prepared weeks ago. She had been gathering the pieces for over a year, ever since her suspicions had first taken root. It started with a misplaced bank statement, then a file left open on his desktop. Driven by a desperate need to understand the man she lived with, she had transformed from a trusting wife into a forensic investigator in her own home. What she had uncovered was far uglier than a simple affair. Harrison wasn't just a cheat in their marriage, he was a cheat in his business, a fraud on a grand scale. He wanted a show. She would give him a grand finale. She placed the envelope on her blotter, her fingers tracing the sharp crease. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had underestimated the classy, perfect wife he thought he owned, and tonight the curtain was coming down on his entire world. The doorbell chimed at precisely 8:20 p.m., a crisp, melodic sound that sliced through the strained silence of the penthouse. Harrison, looking pleased with himself in a fresh shirt, strode to the door. Charlotte stood near the dining table, a portrait of serene composure. She had reapplied her lipstick, a bold crimson that felt like war paint, and her hand rested not on her belly, but on the back of a dining chair, steadying herself for the performance of a lifetime. Harrison swung the door open with a flourish. "Victoria, welcome, welcome. You look stunning." Victoria Sterling was exactly as the magazines portrayed her, but more potent in person. She was a vision of sleek corporate lethality. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. She wore a tailored black dress that was both conservative and suggestive, its sharp lines a stark contrast to the soft, flowing silk of Charlotte's maternity gown. Her smile was bright and practiced, but her eyes, a cool shade of blue, scanned the apartment with an appraiser's gaze. They swept past the art, the furniture, and finally they landed on Charlotte. And this must be the lovely wife, Victoria said, her voice smooth as single malt Scotch. She extended a hand, her grip firm and brief. "Victoria Sterling, it's a pleasure to finally meet you, Charlotte. Harrison speaks so highly of you." "The pleasure is all mine," Charlotte replied, her voice even and warm, betraying none of the acid churning in her stomach. "Harrison has told me so much about your collaboration." The slightest flicker of surprise registered in Victoria's eyes before she masked it. She had likely expected a wilting flower, a weeping hormonal mess. She found instead a woman meeting her gaze without a hint of fear. "All good things, I hope," Victoria laughed, turning her charm back to Harrison. "Only the best," Harrison boomed, placing a proprietary hand on the small of Victoria's back and guiding her further into the room. The gesture was so casual, so intimate, it was a slap in the face. "Drink, Victoria, I have an excellent Chardonnay open, Charlotte." "Just sparkling water for me, thank you," Charlotte said, gliding towards the built-in bar. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in coded language and veiled insults. Harrison and Victoria spoke of mergers, acquisitions, and hostile takeovers, their words a dance of power and ambition. Charlotte played her role flawlessly. She refilled their glasses, offered canapes she'd arranged earlier, and smiled serenely, an enigma in sapphire silk. They moved to the dining table. Harrison placed himself at the head, positioning Victoria to his right, the guest of honor's seat, and Charlotte to his left. Under the brilliant light of the crystal chandelier, the tension was palpable. "This apartment is breathtaking," Harrison Victoria commented, running a finger along the rim of her wine glass. "You truly have exquisite taste." Her eyes met Charlotte's across the table, a silent addition to her sentence in everything but your wife. "We do our best," Harrison said, beaming. "Charlotte is the one with the real eye for art, of course. My domain is a bit more profitable." He was framing her as the decorative, non-essential partner, the one who deals in pretty frivolous things, while he and Victoria conquered the world of real money. It was his classic move, diminishing her to elevate himself. Tonight, however, it felt particularly cruel. Charlotte served the first course, a chilled cucumber soup she had prepared herself. It was elegant, simple, and required no comment. She ate slowly, listening to them discuss the final hurdles of their deal. It seemed Harrison was trying to acquire a smaller innovative tech firm, and Victoria's consortium held a key block of shares. Her support was the final piece of the puzzle. "The board is still hesitant," Victoria said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "They're worried about your exposure, Harrison. Some of your recent ventures have been aggressive. They need reassurance, a sign of stability, of a solid foundation." Her gaze drifted pointedly around the opulent room, lingering on the family photos on a side table before landing back on Charlotte's swollen belly. The message was clear. Harrison was using his pregnant wife and his perfect home as collateral, a prop to prove he was a stable, reliable family man, not just a ruthless corporate raider. Harrison reached across the table and placed his hand over Charlotte's. The gesture, meant to look affectionate for Victoria's benefit, felt like a manacle. His skin was cold. "As you can see," he said, his voice dripping with faux sentimentality, "my foundation has never been stronger. Charlotte is my rock, and with our son on the way, well, I'm a man with a legacy to build." Charlotte felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. He was selling a complete fabrication, using her and their unborn child as bargaining chips. It was then that Harrison delivered the line that would echo in her memory forever. As she moved to clear the soup bowls, a pained expression must have briefly crossed her face. Harrison noticed it instantly. While Victoria was momentarily distracted by a text on her phone, he leaned in close to Charlotte, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for her. "What did I tell you?" He hissed, his smile never leaving his face. "Straighten up. This is a billion-dollar deal, not a therapy session. Stop looking so miserable and act classy. Act classy." There it was again, the command, the dismissal of her entire being into a simple instruction of etiquette. Charlotte froze for a heartbeat. She could feel the blood pounding in her ears. She could feel the furious kick of her son against her ribs, as if he too were outraged. In that instant, every last vestige of love or loyalty she might have held for Harrison Montgomery evaporated. It was gone. All that remained was a cold, hard resolve. She straightened up just as he'd asked. She placed the bowls on the sideboard, and then, instead of heading to the kitchen for the main course, she turned back to the table. She looked at Harrison, then at Victoria, and offered them the most brilliant, genuine smile of the entire evening. "Harrison, you're absolutely right," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound clarity and confidence that made both of them look up in surprise. "You mentioned stability, a solid foundation. And you're right, Victoria, the board should be concerned." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Charlotte, what are you doing?" he warned under his breath. She ignored him, her focus entirely on Victoria. "You see, a foundation built on lies is no foundation at all. It's just sand. And the tide has a funny way of coming in." She walked gracefully back to her seat. But she didn't sit down. Instead, she picked up her clutch purse from the sideboard. It was a beautiful beaded accessory that perfectly matched her dress. It looked delicate, expensive, and utterly harmless. Harrison was starting to look panicked. "Charlotte, that's enough. Go and get the main course." "Oh, but this is the main course, darling," she said sweetly. She clicked open the purse and pulled out not a lipstick, not a compact, but a thick, folded sheaf of legal documents, the manila envelope she'd taken from her study. She held it in her hand for a moment, letting the sight of it hang in the air. Victoria stared at the documents, her corporate lawyer's instincts immediately on high alert. Harrison's face, which had been a mask of confident charm, began to crumble. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a pasty, greyish pallor. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice a choked whisper. Charlotte didn't answer him. She slid the top document from the stack and placed it on the polished mahogany table right next to Victoria's plate. She pushed it gently across the surface until it stopped beside her wine glass. "I believe this is the reassurance your board was looking for." Victoria Charlotte said, her voice as cold and sharp as the crystal glasses beside them. "By all means, have a look." The document lay on the table like a declaration of war. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the city far below. "Victoria Sterling, A woman who navigated corporate minefields for a living hesitated for only a second before her training took over. She picked up the paper. Harrison half rose from his chair, his hand outstretched as if to snatch it away. "Charlotte, don't you dare. This is a private matter." "It's about to be a very public one," Charlotte replied calmly, her gaze locked on Victoria. "Please read it, especially the first page. It's addressed to you in a manner of speaking." Victoria's sharp eyes scanned the dense text. Her professionally composed expression began to fracture, replaced by first confusion, then dawning horror. Her perfectly manicured finger traced the heading at the top of the page. "What is this?" she breathed, looking from the document to Harrison, her face pale. "A temporary emergency court order, asset seizure." Harrison collapsed back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. "It's a mistake," he stammered, looking wildly at Charlotte. She's hormonal, unstable. This is a joke, a sick, twisted joke." "Does this look like a joke?" "Harrison." Charlotte's voice was devoid of emotion. She slid another document across the table. It was a thick, bound report. "That's Exhibit A, the report I submitted to the District Attorney's Office and the SEC 4 days ago." Victoria's head snapped up. "The SEC. Oh, yes." Charlotte continued her composure, utterly chilling. "It seems my husband, in his quest to build his legacy, has been engaging in some rather creative accounting. For years, actually. Wire fraud securities, fraud embezzlement from partner funds. It's all in there. Every falsified ledger, every illegal offshore transfer to shell corporations, every email. You see, Harrison is very meticulous, which makes for excellent evidence." Harrison was now gasping, his face slick with sweat. You went through my things. You spied on me. You call it spying, Harrison. I call it due diligence, the kind a partner should do when she realizes her entire life is a lie," Charlotte retorted. She finally turned her full attention to him, her eyes like chips of ice. "You wanted me to act classy. Is it classy to forge your business partner's signatures? Is it classy to create a phantom investment fund, to hide losses and defraud your clients, including, I believe," she glanced at Victoria, "the pension fund of Sterling Finch's parent company?" Victoria dropped the court order as if it were burning her. She stared at Harrison with utter revulsion and terror. "The pension fund, you told me that was a secure investment." "He told you a lot of things, I'm sure," Charlotte said with a dry, humorless smile. "This is impossible," Harrison snarled, trying to regain some semblance of control. "No judge would sign this without a hearing. You're bluffing." "Not when presented with irrefutable evidence of ongoing criminal activity and a high risk of flight," Charlotte countered smoothly. "That's why it's an emergency order, granted ex parte. My lawyer, Mr. Finch, no relation to your consortium Victoria, though I'm sure he'd find the irony delightful, is very, very good. The order was signed by Judge Marion Albright this afternoon at 4:52 p.m. It went into effect at 5:00 p.m. She glanced at the ornate clock on the mantelpiece. It's now 8:20 p.m., which means for the past 3 hours and 20 minutes you have been, for all legal purposes, penniless. The word hung in the air more shocking than any profanity. Penniless. "The order freezes everything," Charlotte explained, as if lecturing a student. "All personal bank accounts, all brokerage accounts, all corporate accounts over which you have sole signatory authority, which, thanks to your pathological need for control, is most of them. The title to this apartment is frozen. The leases on your cars are frozen. Even your personal credit cards were deactivated an hour ago. Go on, try to buy something." Harrison stared at her, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish pulled from the water. The architect of a billion-dollar empire, a man who moved markets with a phone call, looked utterly and completely broken. Victoria Sterling, ever the pragmatist, was already in self-preservation. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I had no knowledge of this," she said, her voice tight with panic. "My consortium will cooperate fully with the authorities. Our investment was made based on fraudulent misrepresentation." She looked at Harrison with pure contempt. "You are a dead man." Without another word, she turned and marched towards the door, her heels clicking an angry staccato rhythm on the marble floor. She didn't look back. The heavy door closed behind her, leaving Harrison and Charlotte alone in the cavernous room, the remnants of their anniversary dinner sitting between them like wreckage. Harrison finally found his voice, a raw, desperate sound. "Why, Charlotte? Why would you do this? To me, to us, to your own son?" Charlotte finally allowed a flicker of the deep, profound pain she felt to show in her eyes. "You ask me why? You who brought your mistress to our anniversary dinner and told me to act classy. You who built our life on a mountain of lies and expected me to smile and decorate it." She took a step towards him, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "You did this, Harrison. You destroyed us a long time ago. I am just cleaning up the mess. And as for my son," she placed a protective hand on her belly, "I am doing this for him. He will not be raised by a criminal. He will not have the name Montgomery tainted by your disgrace. He will have a mother who taught him the difference between right and wrong. And that true class isn't about money or appearances. It's about integrity, something you know nothing about." As if on cue, a loud, authoritative knock sounded at the front door. Harrison flinched as if he'd been shot. Charlotte didn't. "I believe that will be for you," she said softly. "The U.S. Marshal's here to serve you with the papers personally and ensure the court's order is enforced. They'll be escorting you from the premises." Harrison stared at the door, then back at her, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You'll pay for this. I will destroy you." Charlotte shook her head slowly. "No, Harrison, you won't. You have nothing left to destroy me with. The Marshals will allow you to pack a small overnight bag. I suggest you do it now. It wouldn't be classy to keep them waiting." The story of Harrison Montgomery's downfall didn't begin with a dramatic dinner party confrontation. It began 18 months earlier with a quiet click of a mouse in the dead of night. Charlotte's suspicions had started as a faint, uneasy hum beneath the surface of their marriage. It was the late-night phone calls Harrison would take on the terrace, his voice low and urgent. It was the way he flinched if she came into his home office when his laptop was open. He'd explained it all away as the pressure of work, the stress of high-stakes deals. Charlotte, wanting to believe him, had accepted it. The first crack in her denial came on a Tuesday. Harrison was in London, and she was searching for a misplaced piece of mail in his office. In his desk drawer beneath a stack of old passports, she found a bank statement she didn't recognize. It wasn't from their joint account at Chase or his business account at Morgan Stanley. It was from a small private bank in the Cayman Islands. The account held over $3 million. Her heart had hammered against her ribs. This was his secret. This was where he was hiding money. But from whom? The IRS. Her that night she couldn't sleep. The man she shared a bed with was a stranger. The foundation of her life felt like quicksand. The initial shock gave way to a cold, frightening resolve. She had to know the truth. Not for revenge, not then, but for self-preservation. She was pregnant with his child, and her future, their child's future, was tied to a man she no longer knew or trusted. She began her clandestine investigation. Her background in art history and curation had given her a unique set of skills, patience, a meticulous eye for detail, and a deep understanding of provenance, the history of an object. She began to apply that same methodology to her husband's life. She started with his computer. Harrison was arrogant. He believed his password, a combination of his prep school mascot and the year he made his first million, was impenetrable. It took Charlotte less than 10 minutes to guess it. What she found was a digital labyrinth of deceit. He had a partitioned encrypted section on his hard drive. It took her another week of research, using sophisticated software she downloaded onto a discrete USB drive to crack it. Inside was Harrison's real world. There were 2 sets of books for his primary company, Montgomery Capital. One was the official polished version he showed to investors and the IRS. The other, labeled Internal Metrics, was the truth. It detailed a web of shell corporations from Panama to Delaware, used to launder money and hide massive losses on risky ventures. He was using funds from new investors to pay off old ones, a classic, elegant Ponzi scheme dressed up in the language of private equity. The most damning file was a folder named VS Project. Inside were emails between Harrison and Victoria Sterling. They weren't love letters. They were cold, calculating exchanges detailing their plan to use fraudulent profit and loss statements to entice Sterling Finch to back Harrison's takeover bid. Victoria, it seemed, wasn't just his mistress. She was a co-conspirator, poised to get a massive kickback once the deal closed. But the emails also showed Harrison was playing her hiding the true extent of his company's insolvency from her as well. He planned to use her consortium's money to plug the holes in his sinking ship, leaving them holding the bag. Charlotte felt sick. She spent hours in her soundproofed study, printing documents, saving files to multiple encrypted drives, her hands trembling. This was a federal crime. Many federal crimes. She realized she needed professional help. She couldn't go to just any lawyer. She needed a shark, but an ethical one. She researched for days, looking for the city's top white-collar crime litigators. She found Alistair Finch, a shrewd, silver-haired lawyer, known for his discretion and his tenacity. The fact that his name was part of the firm Victoria was involved with was a coincidence too perfect to ignore. Their first meeting took place in a nondescript coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from the prying eyes of Manhattan's elite. Charlotte arrived wearing a simple dress and a baseball cap, feeling like a spy in her own life. She laid out a portion of the evidence on the small table between them. Alistair Finch listened without interruption, his sharp eyes examining the documents. He asked precise, pointed questions, his expression unreadable. When she was finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, his voice grave. "What you have here is not just grounds for divorce. This is a multi-year, multi-jurisdictional case for the Department of Justice. Your husband is facing decades in prison." "I know," she whispered. "What do you want?" he asked bluntly. "Revenge. A favorable settlement to see him burn." Charlotte took a deep breath. She looked down at her hands, then met his gaze. "I want to be safe. I want my son to be safe. I want to be free of him completely. I don't want his dirty money, but I can't walk away with nothing. He will fight me, and he will use our child as a weapon. I need to neutralize him. Completely and legally." Finch nodded slowly, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "You've done the hard part. The evidence is overwhelming. We can go to the authorities, cooperate fully. In exchange for your testimony, we can petition the court to secure your assets separate from his, and ensure a settlement for you and your son from whatever can be legally recovered. But you must understand what you are asking. Once you pull this trigger, there is no going back. You will be dismantling an empire. It will be messy and it will be public." "He made it messy," Charlotte replied, her voice firm. "I'm just turning on the lights." Over the next 2 months, they worked in secret. Finch and his team vetted every piece of evidence, built the case, and prepared the motions. Charlotte continued to play the part of the dutiful wife, her stomach in knots, every time Harrison walked through the door. The strain was immense. She confided only in her younger sister Genevieve, a pragmatic nurse who lived in Chicago. "Are you sure about this?" "Lottie," Genevieve had asked during one of their hushed phone calls. "He could destroy you." "He already has, Jen," Charlotte had replied, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He destroyed the woman I was. I'm just trying to build a new one from the wreckage, a stronger one." The final piece fell into place when Harrison announced Victoria Sterling was coming to dinner. On their anniversary. It was a calculated act of cruelty designed to humiliate her, to put her firmly in her place. For Charlotte, it was a gift. It was the perfect stage for the final act. She called Alistair Finch immediately. "It's time," she said. "File it. File everything." Finch moved swiftly. He presented the case to a federal judge known for her intolerance of financial crimes. The evidence was so compelling, the risk of Harrison liquidating assets and fleeing so high, that Judge Albright granted the emergency order without hesitation. So when Charlotte stood before her husband, holding that court order, it wasn't a spontaneous act of a woman scorned. It was the culmination of months of silent, meticulous work. It was the calculated strategic move of a woman who had been pushed too far. She hadn't just stumbled upon his secrets. She had become the architect of his fall. She had traded her gilded cage for a battlefield, and she had come prepared to win the war. The U.S. Marshals were professionals. 2 men, broad-shouldered and impassive in dark suits, entered the apartment with quiet authority. They presented Harrison with their credentials and a copy of the warrant, their voices low and firm. The world of shouting and drama that Harrison inhabited had collided with the calm, procedural world of federal law enforcement, and it was utterly disarmed. Harrison, who could command a boardroom with a single glare, seemed to shrink before them. His rage had curdled into a sullen, impotent silence. He was no longer Harrison Montgomery, the titan of industry. He was just a man in a nice suit being told what to do. One marshal stayed in the living room with Charlotte, politely explaining the terms of the order. The apartment was now under the court's control. She would be allowed to remain here temporarily, but she could not remove any assets. Her personal accounts, which Alistair Finch had carefully proven were funded by her family inheritance and premarital earnings, were untouched by the freeze. She was secure. The other marshal escorted Harrison to the master bedroom to pack a bag. Charlotte could hear the muffled sounds of drawers opening and closing. There was no shouting, just the quiet, humiliating sounds of a king being deposed in his own castle. 20 minutes later, Harrison emerged carrying a single leather duffel bag. His face was a thunderous mask of fury. His eyes, when they met Charlotte's, were filled with a venom that was terrifying in its intensity. He looked like a cornered animal. "You will regret this for the rest of your life," he mouthed at her silently as the marshals guided him toward the door. Charlotte didn't flinch. "I've been regretting my life for the past 2 years, Harrison," she said, her voice just loud enough for him to hear. "Tonight is the first night I won't." The heavy penthouse door closed behind them, and for the first time in years, the silence that filled the apartment was not one of loneliness, but of peace. Charlotte sank onto the plush sofa, the adrenaline that had sustained her for hours finally ebbing away, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. She looked at the abandoned anniversary dinner, the expensive wine, the wilting flowers. It was a tableau of a life that no longer existed. And she was glad. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal activity. The news of the asset freeze and the federal investigation into Montgomery Capital hit the financial world like a tsunami. The story was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. Harrison Montgomery, once lauded as a visionary, was now branded a fraud. His business partner, Richard Davenport, a man who had always treated Charlotte with a kind of weary sympathy, called her. His voice was ragged with stress. "Charlotte, is it true, all of it?" "I'm afraid so, Richard," she said softly. "My God, my entire life savings, my reputation. It was all tied up with him." He sounded broken. "He lied to all of us." "I know," she said, "and I'm sorry you were caught in the crossfire. My lawyer has your contact information. He believes you are a victim here, not a participant. He will be in touch to see if you're willing to cooperate with the prosecution." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Thank you, Charlotte," he said, finally, his voice thick with emotion. "And for what it's worth, good for you." Victoria Sterling vanished. Her lawyers released a statement, professing her shock and betrayal, positioning her as one of Harrison's primary victims. She was cooperating fully as a witness for the prosecution, effectively turning on Harrison to save herself. Her planned merger was dead, her reputation tarnished by association, but Charlotte knew a survivor when she saw one. Victoria would land on her feet, far away from the wreckage she had helped create. Harrison's legal troubles mounted with breathtaking speed. With his assets frozen, he was forced to rely on a court-appointed public defender, a humiliation that must have been worse than any prison sentence. He was declared a flight risk and his passport was confiscated. Bail was set at a figure he had no way of paying. He sat in a federal detention center, stripped of his tailored suits, and his power just another man in an orange jumpsuit. Charlotte, guided by Alistair Finch, navigated the legal labyrinth with calm precision. She gave her deposition to the assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who looked at Charlotte with a mixture of pity and respect. Charlotte recounted the story, calmly providing the terabytes of data she had collected as evidence. She began the quiet work of building a new life. She put the penthouse, now a symbol of her imprisonment, on the market through the court-appointed receiver. She started looking for a smaller apartment, somewhere downtown with more light and less marble, a place where a baby could crawl without fear of chipping and priceless sculpture. She reconnected with friends she had been forced to neglect, women who were thrilled to have the real Charlotte back, not the polished Mrs. Montgomery. One evening, her sister Genevieve flew in from Chicago to help her pack up her personal belongings. As they sorted through boxes in the cavernous master closet, surrounded by designer clothes and handbags that represented a life of performance, Genevieve paused. "I was so scared for you, Lottie," she admitted. "I thought he would crush you." Charlotte held up a silk dress, the very one she had worn on the night it all ended. She looked at it for a moment, then tossed it into a donation bag. "He almost did," Charlotte said, "but he made a fatal error. He thought that because he had bought me, he owned me. He never realized that my silence had a price, and his cruelty finally made me unwilling to pay it." She was no longer just a victim of Harrison's deceit. She was the agent of its unraveling. The battlefield had been bloody, but she was the one left standing, ready to build a new world from the ashes of the old one. 6 months later, the city was draped in the crisp golden light of late autumn. Charlotte pushed a stroller along a sun-dappled path in Washington Square Park, a contented smile on her face. The air was cool, smelling of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor, and the faint, earthy scent of fallen leaves. In the stroller, nestled under a soft cashmere blanket, slept 4-month-old Alexander Dubois. She had given him her name. there would be no Montgomery dynasty. There would only be a boy raised by a mother who loved him fiercely and taught him that his worth was measured by his character, not his bank balance. Life was different now. It was smaller, quieter, and infinitely richer. She lived in a bright, airy 3-bedroom apartment in Greenwich Village with a small terrace overflowing with plants. The walls were filled not with investment-grade art, but with photographs of her family finger paintings Alex had already started to make, and prints from artists she genuinely loved. It was a home, not a showroom. The legal storm had finally passed. Harrison faced with an ironclad case, and testimony from his former partner and his former mistress had taken a plea deal. He was sentenced to 15 years in a medium-security federal prison for fraud and embezzlement. His empire was dismantled, its assets liquidated, to pay back a fraction of what he had stolen. Victoria Sterling, having provided key testimony, walked away with her freedom, albeit with a permanently scarred career. As part of the settlement, the court had awarded Charlotte a significant sum, a portion of the recovered assets legally designated for spousal and child support. It wasn't the billionaire lifestyle she'd once known, but it was more than enough. It was security. It was a fresh start. Most importantly, it was clean money. She had started a small, independent art consultancy firm from her home office, helping young, aspiring collectors navigate the art world. Her work was meaningful, her clients appreciated her, and she set her own hours, always making time for Alex's naps and feeding schedules. Her sister Genevieve sat on a park bench beside her, sipping a hot coffee. "He looks so peaceful," she said, nodding at the sleeping baby. "He's a good baby," Charlotte said, her heart swelling with a love so profound it sometimes felt like it might burst. "He doesn't have a care in the world." "That's because his mum took care of all of them before he even got here," Genevieve said, squeezing her sister's shoulder. "Have you heard from him?" Charlotte shook her head. "No. Alistair handles all communication through his lawyer. I get a report once a quarter. That's it. He's just a name on a legal document now." He was no longer a monster in her closet or a ghost at her dinner table. He was a memory, a lesson learned in the harshest way possible. She no longer felt anger or hatred towards him, only a profound and distant pity for a man so hollow he had to build a world of lies to feel important. As the sun began to dip below the buildings, casting long shadows across the park, Charlotte looked at her son's tiny, perfect face. She had been told to act classy in a moment of extreme degradation. And she had. But her definition of class had been rewritten. It wasn't about restraint in the face of humiliation. It was about having the courage to demand respect. It wasn't about quiet dignity. It was about speaking the truth, no matter how loud or disruptive. She had walked through fire, but she hadn't been consumed. She had emerged on the other side, not as the polished, fragile Mrs. Montgomery, but as Charlotte Dubois, a mother, a businesswoman, a survivor. A woman who had learned that the greatest wealth in the world wasn't stored in a penthouse or a Cayman Islands bank account, but in the freedom to live an honest life and the quiet, unshakable peace of a clear conscience. And by that measure, she was the richest woman she knew. The world for inmate 730408054 was measured in concrete and steel. The man formerly known as Harrison Montgomery now resided in a cell that was smaller than the master bathroom's walk-in closet in his Manhattan penthouse. There was no art on the walls, only grey paint, and the faint, permanent stains of lives lived in quiet desperation. The air smelled of industrial cleaner boiled vegetables and the faint, cloying scent of male sweat. This was his new empire, a 6-by-9-foot box at the Federal Correctional Institution, Allenwood. For the first few months, Harrison had been sustained by a towering, incandescent rage. He played the scene at the dinner table over and over in his mind, not with remorse, but with a forensic analyst's eye for his own missteps. He hadn't been cruel enough. He hadn't been controlling enough. He had underestimated her. He had seen Charlotte as a beautiful decorative object he had acquired, and he had forgotten that even the most delicate porcelain, when shattered, can have lethally sharp edges. His fury was a currency that bought him nothing here. His name, which once opened doors to the most exclusive clubs and boardrooms in the world, was now a liability. In the prison yard he was a suit, a soft target, whose stories of billion-dollar deals were met with derision and contempt. His attempts to leverage his financial acumen, offering advice on market trends to men whose only capital was a packet of ramen noodles, earned him nothing but scornful laughter. The complex hierarchies of wealth and power he had mastered meant nothing in a place where the only commodities that mattered were respect, physical strength, and connections to the outside that could smuggle in contraband. Harrison had none of these. He was assigned to the prison library, a cruel irony orchestrated by a warden with a dark sense of humor. He spent his days shelving worn-out paperbacks and processing interlibrary loan requests, his hands, which once signed off on 9-figure transactions, now blackened with the cheap ink of romance novels and outdated encyclopedias. He was surrounded by stories of other worlds, a constant torturous reminder of the one he had lost. One afternoon, a younger inmate named Sal, in for armed robbery, sidled up to him as he was sorting returned books. "Hey, Montgomery," Sal smirked, revealing a silver-capped tooth. "Heard on the news your old lady is living it up in the village. Sold the Sky Palace, started her own thing. Looks like she's doing just fine without your credit cards." Harrison's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes fixed on the spine of the book in his hand. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." Sal chuckled, leaning against the shelf. "It's funny, ain't it? You're in here eating slop and she's out there a hero. The papers love her. The brave whistleblower wife. Probably got a line of rich guys waiting to take your spot." Every word was a small, sharp jab. The thought of Charlotte, his Charlotte thriving, was more punishing than any sentence the judge could have handed down. In his fantasies, she was destitute, regretful, begging for his forgiveness. The reality that she was happy, successful, and had erased him so completely from her life and their son's life was a poison he drank every single day. He hated her not just for what she had done, but for her audacity to be happy afterward. Later that day, during mail call, a guard tossed a thin envelope onto his bunk. It was from his court-appointed lawyer. He tore it open, his heart thumping with a familiar, bitter hope. An appeal, a loophole, a miracle. The letter was brief and devoid of sentiment. His final appeal had been summarily rejected. Furthermore, the liquidation of Montgomery Capital's assets was complete. After the victims' funds and government fines were paid, there was nothing left. The name Montgomery was now officially worthless. He read the letter twice, then a third time, as if the words might change. They didn't. This was it. The final definitive end. There was no comeback, no second act. That night, Harrison Montgomery lay on his thin mattress, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. The usual sounds of the prison, a distant cough, the clang of a closing gate, a shout from another cell block faded into a dull hum. He was stripped of everything, his name, his wealth, his family, his future. All he had left was time, years of it stretching out before him in an endless grey expanse. He finally understood regret. It wasn't a sharp passing pain. It was a physical place, a permanent address. It was this cell. It was the taste of the metallic water, the scratch of the wool blanket, the memory of a sapphire silk dress, and a calm, quiet voice saying, "This is the main course, darling." He had spent his life accumulating wealth only to learn in its stark and total absence the true cost of his actions. His real sentence wasn't 15 years. It was an eternity of knowing he had authored his own desolation. Charlotte's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet, meticulous work done in the shadows. It's the courage to stop accepting disrespect and to start architecting your own justice. She was pushed to her limit, but instead of breaking, she built a case, reclaimed her life, and protected her child's future. She proved that integrity is the ultimate power, and that the most devastating blow isn't delivered with a shout, but with a calm, clear, and legally binding truth. If Charlotte's story of reclaiming her power resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories of incredible resilience and poetic justice. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Charlotte's master plan.